In square 2 gentle waves for both options, on rows 17 and 18 there's a textured slip stitch pattern, so I'm going to demonstrate now those 2 rows. So to begin with, I've tied the indigo and the silvery blue together to make it easier to join in at the beginning of the row, and I'm going to begin by working that first stitch using both of these yarns. It's just going to be easier that way to begin the row. Now before I go any further, just to secure things here and to make sure it's not loose, I'm going to tie the 2 ends of the indigo and the silvery blue with the favourite denims from the previous row, just to make that nice and secure. Just remember, if you begin the row like this, that those 2 loops there, those 2 stitches, that's actually 1 stitch, not 2. Okay, so that will be my indigo knit one, and then I am working 1 stitch in silvery blue. Okay, so this is actually like a Fair Isle method that I'm using here, but it's only 1 stitch in one colour, 1 stitch in the alternate colour. Okay, so it's quite simple to do. So silvery knit 1, and then when I pick up the indigo, I'm going to pick up the indigo so it comes over the top of the silvery blue. Okay, and then when I drop this back down, I'm going to pick up the silvery blue from under the indigo, and if I continue to do this all along the row, my over and under will stay consistent. In other words, the yarns will not twist round each other, because I'm constantly throughout the whole of this row picking one yarn from on top, which is indigo, one from underneath, and alternating that all the way across the row. So this is in fact really Fair Isle, but on a very, very basic level. Make sure your yarns are untangled at the beginning of the row, and then you'll see by the end of the row that everything is looking nice and neat and even with your yarns completely untangled. So the stitch on the next row, which is going to be knitted on a wrong side row to create that kind of raised pearl stitch, is the indigo. And I found that the pearl, this raised stitch, sits better if the yarn that you're using for that, which is indigo, is on top rather than underneath when you're doing this row before you begin row 18. So it will be indigo on top, silvery blue coming up from under. You continue to repeat this all the way across the row. Keep the stitches spread to the correct width on the needle as you're knitting each one, so that this row, where you're taking the yarns around the back of each other, where they're crossing at the back, it just makes sure that the stitches don't sit puckered. Okay, on the last stitch then, I'm going to work the very last stitch using both yarns again, because that will make the edge really tight. But again, remember that these 2 stitches here and these 2 at the beginning of the row are 1 stitch, not 2. Okay, so on to row 18. So row 18 uses indigo only. You can cut silvery blue off, it's as indicated in the pattern. And then we're using indigo only for this row. Okay, so we begin with a purl one. Just start that again. With a purl one. And then it's very simple on this row. you are just slipping one purlwise, take the yarn back, knit one, bring yarn forward, and then repeat this across the whole row. So it's a slip stitch pattern. So you're slipping the silvery blue stitches purlwise and you are knitting the indigo stitches. And you repeat this all the way across the row. Now what I'm also going to do here, I'm going to be conscious of keeping the stitches on the needle that I'm knitting onto, keeping the stitches spread at the correct width again, so that the stitches are not, the knitting is not puckered at the end of the row. Okay, and I'm working these knit stitches quite nice and firmly. The Denim Revive indigo yarn is quite a heavy yarn, it's quite thick, so to keep that tension nice and neat on this row, I'm just putting a little bit tighter when I'm working with this yarn on this row. Okay, so we work across this row, slipping purlwise silvery blue, knitting indigo, right the way until we are at the last two stitches, which are just coming up. And then it's slip one purlwise and purl one, remembering that if you joined in as I did with the two colours held together, knitted together, that is one stitch, not two. Okay, so if we turn this around and have a look, it'll become much more evident on the next row up, but you can just see here your purl stitches and your slip stitches in between. And that's rows 17 and 18 of square 2.